In Monday's video, where we talked about the lead up to Black Ops Cold War, which comes out in a week and a half. We went through our power rankings, we went through our predictions. I tried to show you guys why I think one team is potentially a little bit better than the other. We talked about that middle group of teams, and in the discussions of that video, there were some comments in terms of maybe one team should be a little bit higher than the other, or maybe one team is in the wrong bracket. So because of those, I wanted to go ahead. I wanted to break down my predictions by bracket so you guys could see exactly why I put teams in the areas that I put them. So we'll look at the players, we'll look at what they're good at, we'll compare them to their other roles. You guys can get a really good idea in terms of where I think teams are at and why I think they are there. This is another one of those videos as we transition over to this screen where if you guys have comments, you disagree, put it down below. I'm always really interested to hear what you guys have to say and to reply to it. So this was the graphic that we ended up with at the end of that power rankings and predictions video on Monday. So we kind of have this group of teams right here in the middle where one team or two teams could really take a step or two and get into that upper echelon. We also have kind of these teams to the left where we'll see if anybody pulls ahead. We'll see, in fact, Paris doesn't even really have their entire roster yet. So there's a lot to be determined in this bottom ranking, but those three teams at the top, I'm pretty confident in. I really do feel like Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, those are our three best teams. And this was the order that I came through with. So today, what I want to do is I want to go ahead, I want to move over to this graphic here, and I want you guys to see why I have them exactly where I have them, okay? I feel like this is the order that I have them in, but I want to compare each of their roles so you guys can see why I feel that way, okay? So without further ado, the first thing I want to do, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take what I think might be the most important role in 4v4 Black Ops Cold War, a slower game with longer time to kill, what I feel like might be the most important role, and that's the main AR role. So from Atlanta, we have Arcides. That's their main AR heading into this next season of the CDL. From Chicago, we have Formal. Then from the Dallas Empire, we have Crim6, right? So these are the three guys that we're really comparing in terms of which one feels like they're going to be the best main AR heading into Black Ops Cold War. So when I'm looking at these three, I feel like there's one person that stands out just a little bit more than the others. If I had to start a team today and I'm taking a main AR from this list, and by the way, the best main AR might not be on this list, right? Let's just clarify that first. This might not be the best main AR in the entirety of the CDL, but from these three, if we're comparing these three squads, I think you have to go with Arcides. I think he showed last year, even though he's never really been that guy, that main AR guy, right? He wasn't that person on that United squad. He wasn't last year with Formal there, even though they did try to switch it up, and towards the end of the year, you had two ARs. But still, he's never been that guy that people count on to be that main AR. So this will kind of be his first time doing it, but when you're talking about Arcides, obviously the gun skill is top tier, right? Bar none, he has some of the greatest gun skill at that AR position that we are seeing or have seen throughout the Modern Warfare season. But other than that, he does things really well in terms of intangibles, right? Arcides is really good in terms of being an in-game leader, keeping his head in those really intense situations, telling people where they need to be going, what they need to be watching, how they need to be rotating. So that's one of the things that gives him an edge. And also he has this demeanor about him where if they're just playing, a throwback tournament, he's always the same demeanor. He has the same even keel attitude, whether he's playing just an off-season throwback tournament or he's playing on the main stage. So I feel like there are so many things that Arcides does super well. If I had to pick between these three, I think he has just a little bit of an advantage between the other two. Now, where this gets more difficult is trying to decide between Formal and Crim. Because if I'm looking at these two, obviously one had a little bit of a better year last year in terms of Crim, especially down towards the end of the year when it came to champs. Crim was playing super well. In fact, it was a little bit of a running joke in terms of the old vets, Clayster and Crim, were really the solid rock, the foundation of that squad as they headed throughout their champs run. But if we're comparing these two, and if I'm just looking at these two, I do feel as though Formal has a little bit of an advantage in terms of gun skill. Not that Crim is awful, not that Crim is terrible. I just feel like if you need somebody to go out and win you a map or win you a rotation, that's something that we haven't even really talked about. This main AR role, sure, it was important in Modern Warfare, but when it comes to Black Ops Cold War, you're trying to win rotations. It's you versus the other main AR. You win that gun battle, you're going to win rotations and spawns for the next hardpoint. It is seriously important to have the better main AR, and I just feel like all things included here, I feel like had Dallas kept Clayster, then that might have been what put them over the edge. I just feel like Crim is not quite on that same level as Formal. Formal showed it time and time again. Formal always shows up when it comes to in-person lands. So for that, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to give a slight edge to Formal here. I'm going to put him in that better category. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take Crim. I'm going to put him in that good category. Not that Crim is an awful main AR. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. I just feel like if we're comparing these three, Arcedes has a little bit of an advantage. Then I would probably take Formal on my squad over Crim. Although there are some leadership qualities to talk about there. If you're comparing Crim and Formal, maybe that could become a little bit of an issue in terms of who's showing up every day, who's super motivated. So the difference between those two is really small, but if you get a Formal that's committed and motivated and on time every day and showing up and putting in the work, I just think he's a little bit of a better player. So that's the main AR. After that, let's go ahead. Let's move on to that main Slayer SMG, right? You might think that's the most important role. It's either the most important or the second most important. So from the Atlanta FaZe, in terms of this role, even though they have a couple people that can really do it, the person that you're calling on to be that main Slayer super aggressive SMG is aBeZy. So we have aBeZy from the Atlanta FaZe. We have Envoy from the Chicago Huntsmen, and we have Shotzzy from the Dallas Empire. Now, what I'll say is these three are super tight, right? When it comes to last year's achievements, obviously Shotzzy won League MVP, so Shotzzy, of course, has that going for him. But even though that's true, Envoy was a League MVP category, he was a candidate for League MVP, and aBeZy probably would have been also if two of his teammates weren't already there, right? Celium and Simp were also candidates for League MVP. So there's a little bit of a discussion to be had there in terms of did aBeZy just not get that nomination because his teammates were already there? So if I'm looking at these three overall, if I'm looking for on my team a main slaying SMG, I don't care which one of these three I have. I feel like the three of these are, you can't go wrong with either one of them. But just based off of movement and gun skill and merits from the last year alone and the growth that this player showed as a rookie, I think if I have to pick one between these three, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take Shotzzy and I'm going to move him on. Now, who knows, right? All that we have in terms of what is Shotzzy capable of is what he did last year. Surely this could change over time. It's yet to be seen. But what he did last year with his gun skill and his movements and just especially starting the year at that Minnesota LAN and where he finished up as the league MVP, I feel like you have to put him there whether you can make a good argument against him or not. Now, where I have a trouble making an argument is between these other two. What do you do between Envoy and aBeZy? First of all, Envoy is that guy for the Chicago Huntsmen, right? He is their league MVP candidate. He can do everything. Obviously, he can slay with the best of them. In fact, when he was playing well is when Chicago was also doing well as a team. So he really was that person. He was the main cog in their components, right? He was that guy where if he's playing well, Chicago's probably having a pretty good match or map or tournament, however you want to go ahead and break it down. When it comes to aBeZy, he didn't quite have that same level of pressure on his shoulders, right? Because if he didn't play well, you still have Celium. And if they didn't play well, you still have Simp. So there were so many people on that Atlanta roster that could pick up the slack that he didn't quite have the same pressure on his shoulders. But with that being said, go back 2 years to his time at E United, Abizi was phenomenal. Go back last year to what he did with the Atlanta FaZe, he was phenomenal. You can say the same thing throughout the course of the last 2 years when it comes to Envoy. If I had to pick, I would probably take Envoy as the person on my squad, but I don't feel personally that it really matters. I feel like there's a little bit of a difference between the two of them. One plays a little bit faster. One might have a little bit better gun skill. One gives you a little bit more in terms of that entry man and SND, right? Abizi has that going towards or for him, but I don't feel like it's enough to separate him from Envoy. So because of that, this is one of those ones that I just can't call. So I'm going to take Envoy. I'm going to put Abizi, and I'm going to say in terms of this role here with these two teams, I think that this is a tie. If you disagree, let me know in the comments, but this is how I feel about these two. The next role is going to be like that secondary SMG, right? Now, whether you want to classify some of these guys as that role, of course, that can be debated, but I'm trying to just go role by role. So when it comes to Atlanta, you have Simp. When it comes to Chicago, you have Scump. And when it comes to Dallas, you have Hugh. Now, what I'll say between these three is that there's a clear-cut choice here, right? If I'm starting today, I'm starting a new franchise, it's an expansion draft, I have all 48 pros listed out in front of me, and I have to have a number one pick, without a doubt, you're picking Simp. There's no, if you need him to run a main AR, he hasn't done it, but I guarantee you he can do it. If you want a main slaying SMG, that's kind of what he does at times anyways. He can be that main slaying SMG. If you need him to run a flex, he can be a flex. If you need him to get a 3-piece to win a round 11 in search and destroy with a sniper rifle, he can do it, right? He can do everything. Now, I feel like in terms of communication, he's top-notch there as well. Of course, from, if you're thinking of like a marketing standpoint, he might not quite have that going for him yet, right? He doesn't have the personality of a Scump or an Envoy or one of those players that really brings in a ton of popularity and an audience and stuff like that. But he's still also super young. This was only his second year in the league. Actually, it was kind of his first year because he didn't play throughout the entirety of that year with E United. But still, if you're starting a franchise, you're saying Simp, you're my number one overall pick, which leaves me with Scump and Hugh, okay? Now, when I'm comparing these two, this is a little bit tough. So I think that both of these guys are pretty good players. I'm not really prepared to say that one is a clear-cut second pick over the other. That's just not how I feel right now. I feel like, let's talk about Scump for a second. He didn't quite have as good of a year as he had 5 or 6 years ago, right? It's tough for him to still be putting up those numbers that he used to put up back then. But the thing about Scump is that when it's a big time match and he's on the main stage, he just has this clutch factor to him where no stage is too bright for him and he shows up and he gets it done. That's something that cannot be overlooked when it comes to Scump's accomplishments. In big time moments, he really does perform super well. So you have that when it comes to Scump. Now, comparing him to Hugh, when it comes to Hugh, there were a lot of moments throughout, especially in champs, where, in fact, the COD League tweeted it out, Dallas Empire tweeted it out, where you need a 1v2 in a search and destroy round. All of a sudden, Hugh comes through. He makes 2 massive plays. Clay goes crazy. I'm sure you guys probably remember those clips, but Clay goes crazy, and I think Dallas is missing a lot without Clay. That's a different discussion for a different video, but Hugh also performs. And I think if you took throughout the entirety of the year, Hugh was probably the better player overall. I don't want to get, I don't want to get burned. I don't want to get burned for this or whatever. I just think overall, if you had to pick one in terms of where they're at in their careers and how they played throughout the entirety of the year last year and where their careers might be going, I'm probably taking Hugh here. So in the better category, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to put Hugh here. Again, if you disagree, let me know in the comments down below. Now, with that said, I do think that Scump is still probably better at his position than Krim is at his position. So I'm going to put them like this in terms of the good category. I just feel like, I don't know, it would be tough for me. And I know that, Crim6 gets this all the time, but it would be tough for me to rely on him to win rotations and those critical gun battles against some of the other top ARs in this league. We'll see what happens throughout the course of the year. That's the thing. Nobody really knows yet. But I feel like Scump is probably a little bit more reliable at his position than Krim might be at his position. Which brings us to the last category here, which is that super important flex role. So from Atlanta, you have Celium. From Chicago, you have Dashy. And from Dallas, you have Illy. Now, when you're comparing these three, again, I think one of these guys is the best flex in the league. I think if you have all 48 players in front of you, you have to pick one, or if you have all 12 flex players in front of you from each roster, you have to pick one. This is easy for me. I'm taking Celium. I think if you need him to run, an SMG and move quickly around the map and do well in that regards, put pressure on the enemy team, he can do that. You need him to run an AR and get super important kills and search and destroy rounds. He can do that. He can do everything around the map that you need him to do, other than maybe sniping, which might give a little bit of an edge just in terms of that column to Dashy, because we know Dashy's really good with a sniper rifle in his hands. But outside of sniping, which they wouldn't need anyways, because Simp would be sniping in terms of who does what on Atlanta, you have to go with Celium as the best flex. I just think that he is the best flex in the league. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to put Celium there. Now, where this gets interesting is comparing Dashy and comparing Illy, because it's really hard not to have a recency bias when it comes to those two, right? So if I'm thinking about these two, last year, Illy might not have played the best in terms of the entirety of the year. I think a lot of people expected him to be that MVP caliber player, and he really wasn't. That was Shotzzy. But if you're just going and ranking those on Dallas, you have Clay, who is super important. You have Shotzzy. You have Huke. I mean, you have Krim and Illy. They're probably the two that were the lowest regards in terms of their team, but he did play pretty decent throughout the entirety of the year. Now, where it's rough to compare these, or where it's tough to compare these two, is that Dashy didn't even make it throughout the entirety of the season last year. But with that being said, if you go back 2 years, Dashy was one of the top talents in Black Ops 4, and that's undisputable, right? Dashy was really good. Now, you could get into, does he have the commitment? Is he going to be there on time? Is he going to grind? Is he going to do all those intangible things? That's something that is definitely a bigger question mark when it comes to Dashy rather than Illy. But if I'm comparing these two, I look at it pretty similarly to how I did with Abizi and Envoy. I feel like each of them have their question marks. If it's just, if Dashy is committed and he's putting in the time and he's grinding and he's there in terms of being a good teammate and all of that, I probably give Dashy a little bit of an edge here. But that's a big if, because the last time we saw him, he didn't really quite do that towards the end of his Optic era in terms of Modern Warfare. And when he was on that team with Crim6, obviously there were issues there also. TP has also talked to that, who was the coach of that squad at the time. So each of these guys have question marks, but for the purpose of this video, I'm going to put them both kind of right here in this better category. I don't think that they compare with Celium, but I can't really distinguish a difference between the two of them. So because of that, if we're looking at our 4v4 rosters, over here in the best category, you have 3 people from the Atlanta phase, right? You're looking at these guys. You have Celium, you have Simp, you have Arcides. It's just a stacked roster. And really, when it comes to that main slaying SMG, I put Shotzzy over there mainly because he won the MVP last year when, Abizi could have won it. It's not like Abizi had a 0.9 throughout the entirety of the year. The man, it seemed like every single tournament you had highlight plays from Abizi. So Abizi could easily be in that best category in the same way that Envoy could easily be over there also, right? Let's not disregard that whatsoever. So in terms of this, Atlanta, I think that they're the best squad, bar none. I think that everybody's going to be playing catch up, very similar to how they did with Modern Warfare to them. Chicago, I feel like mainly just because Envoy, you could probably sneak over here if you really wanted to. Dashy, I think he's a question mark, but I think if he's committed, he's probably a little bit of a better talent, at least as of right now, than Illy is. Illy is super young, so who knows what ends up happening from there. And when you're comparing Crim, listen, I know the guy is considered the GOAT as of late when it comes to competitive Call of Duty. He has the most rings, he has the most championships, all of that. I just don't know if he can be in that role and be as effective as some of these other guys can, whereas I think Scump is still a really good pro. He's super serviceable at that second SMG position. So that's where I have it. That's how I break down those top 3 squads. Again, in the comments down below, let me know what you guys are feeling. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Would you put it somewhere else? Thank you guys so much for the support as of late. New around here, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, it helps out the channel. We will see you in tomorrow's upload.